Star Trek Discovery can never tell its best story now that the show is over. When Star Trek Discovery launched in 2017, it carried an enormous weight. Not only was it the first Star Trek show on television in over a decade, but it was also tasked with reinvigorating a franchise that had become more associated with nostalgia than innovation. Over 5 seasons, Discovery pushed boundaries with cinematic visuals, emotional storytelling, and bold character choices. And yet, as the series concluded in 2024, one truth remains frustratingly clear. Star Trek Discovery can never tell its best story now that it's over. The irony is that the seeds of that story were planted across all 5 seasons. The show constantly hinted at paths it never fully explored, most notably the long-term consequences of leaping into the 32nd century, the philosophical implications of rebuilding the Federation from scratch, and the radical transformation of Michael Burnham into a figure of legendary status. These threads pointed toward a grand narrative about Star Trek's very essence, how ideals endure when the structures around them collapse. But the show ran out of time just as it reached the point where such a story could truly flourish. Let's break down why Discovery's most important story will remain untold, and what that story might have been. The 32nd century was the perfect setting for Star Trek's best story. When Burnham and her crew jumped forward nearly 1,000 years at the end of Season 2, Discovery reset the stakes in a way no Star Trek series had dared before. By the time Season 3 began, the Federation was shattered, warp travel was limited by the mysterious burn, and star systems that once thrived under shared ideals now stood fractured and alone. This premise was brilliant. Unlike The Next Generation, which depicted the Federation at its height, or Deep Space Nine, which examined its moral compromises, Discovery was suddenly positioned to ask the most fundamental question: what happens when the Federation fails? The narrative opportunity was enormous. Burnham and her crew weren't just explorers anymore. They were the torchbearers of a forgotten ideal, arriving in a future where the dream of unity had been reduced to myth. Starfleet badges were relics, the Federation's symbol of hope and memory. The stage was set for Discovery to tell the ultimate Star Trek story, one about the endurance of optimism against the decay of civilization itself. And while the show flirted with this story, it never committed to it. By the end of Season 3, the Federation was already reforming. By Season 5, the Federation felt almost stable again. The chance to spend multiple seasons unpacking what it truly means to resurrect a society from its ashes slipped away. Burnham's transformation was only half told. From its very first episode, Discovery was Michael Burnham's story. She was the mutineer turned redeemer, a character who constantly wrestled with her choices and the cost of leadership. By the end, Burnham became captain of the USS Discovery and a celebrated figure in Federation history. The series finale even revealed that she and her ship would one day become part of legend. But here's the problem: we never actually saw Burnham live as the icon she was destined to become. The best version of Discovery's story would have been about Burnham as the ultimate captain, not just fighting galactic threats, but shaping the philosophy of a new era. Imagine Burnham mentoring the next generation of officers in a broken galaxy, or her moral decisions redefining what Starfleet meant in the 32nd century. Instead, the show ended just as her legend was beginning. It's the equivalent of The Next Generation ending right after Picard took command of the Enterprise D. We saw the struggle, the hardship, the rise, but not the long-term payoff. Burnham's greatest chapter is forever unwritten. Discovery was always at war with its own format. Part of why Discovery couldn't tell its best story comes down to structure. Each season leaned heavily into serialized storytelling, with season-long mysteries like The Red Angel, The Burn, or The Search for the Progenitors. These arcs were high stakes and often cosmic in scope. But the best story Discovery could have told wasn't about galactic mysteries. It was about slow, painstaking reconstruction. The Federation's rebirth didn't require galaxy-ending threats. It required diplomacy, rebuilding trust, and exploring the smaller stories of fractured civilizations. Think of the most acclaimed Deep Space Nine episodes. They weren't always about the Dominion War, but about moral compromise, cultural exchange, and personal sacrifice. Discovery's format rarely allowed for that. Every season needed a central villain or mystery, leaving little room for quieter tales of rebuilding, which were exactly what the 32nd century demanded. If Discovery had embraced an anthology-style approach, big story arcs balanced with standalone episodes about reuniting star systems, it could have told the slow-burn masterpiece that the setting deserved. Instead, the show constantly reset itself, never allowing the Federation's rebirth to unfold as more than a subplot. The best story would have redefined Star Trek for the future. Here's the real tragedy. The story Discovery never told could have redefined Star Trek for the next generation of fans. For decades, the franchise has thrived on exploring new worlds while holding on to a consistent vision of the Federation's golden age. But by jumping into the 32nd century, Discovery offered something radically different. A Federation not as we knew it, but as something fragile, damaged, and in need of reinvention. This was the perfect lens through which to examine our own fractured world. In an era of global distrust, crumbling alliances, and questions about the survival of democratic ideals, Discovery could have shown us how to rebuild, not through warfare or technology, but through empathy, diplomacy, and hope. Imagine a multi-season arc where the Federation isn't restored by the end of Season 3, but only after years of painful effort. Imagine storylines about planets who no longer believe in unity, or cultures that thrived after the burn and now see no reason to return. Imagine Burnham forced to weigh her ideals against the messy compromises of leadership. That was Discovery's best story, the one that could have transcended even the legendary optimism of the original series and the moral complexities of Deep Space Nine. But we'll never see it because the show simply didn't last long enough. Why the story will never be told. Yes, the Star Trek universe is vast and spin-offs are always possible. It's not impossible that another series or film will revisit the 32nd century someday. But here's why Discovery itself can never tell its best story. One, the cast has moved on. Sonequa Martin Green and the ensemble poured years into the show. Without them, the emotional foundation of Burnham's journey is gone. Two, the show ended with closure. The finale deliberately tied up loose ends, giving Burnham her happy ending with Book and cementing Discovery's place in history. A return risks undermining that closure. Free franchise focus has shifted. Paramount is investing in Strange New Worlds, Section 31, and Starfleet Academy. None of these shows are set in the 32nd century. The narrative torch has already passed. The story could still exist in novels or comics, but the specific magic of Discovery, its cast, its visuals, its tone, can't be replicated elsewhere. That's what makes its unwritten story such a loss. Discovery's legacy lies in the story it could have told. It's tempting to see this as a failure, but in truth, it's part of Discovery's strange legacy. The show was always about ambition, about reaching for something bigger than itself. Sometimes it succeeded. Season 4's exploration of radical empathy was pure Star Trek. Other times it stumbled, overwhelmed by too many plot twists. But its greatest contribution may be the possibility it left behind. The 32nd century remains Star Trek's most intriguing canvas, a reminder that the franchise can always push forward, not just backward into nostalgia. And Burnham's untold story, the story of the captain who rebuilt hope in the galaxy's darkest era, will continue to live in the imaginations of fans, even if the screen never shows it. Final thought. Star Trek: Discovery was never perfect, but it